Hi and welcome to my OCR A-Level Biology revision session with me, Christine. So today's lesson I want to look at the structure and function of neurons. So let's just take a step back and remind ourselves about the nervous system then. So the nervous system is made up of the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, and your peripheral nerves. Now, these are all composed of cells which are called neurons. We're going to look at the different neurons which are found in the central nervous system compared to the peripheral nerves. But they all do the same function. They transmit rapid electrical impulses throughout the body. So let's start with the sensory neuron then. Now the sensory neuron is going to conduct the nerve impulse from a receptor to the central nervous system, and it has got some key features that we're going to identify here. And the first one is the cell body. So the cell body is identifiable because that's where we'll find the nucleus. What we also know is within the cell body there are lots of smooth endoplasmic reticulum and mitochondria, and that's because they're involved in the production of neurotransmitters. And I have done a whole video on the synaptic transmission, so do check that one out. But there's a few other features we need to identify when we look at the structure of a neuron. Now, the structure of a neuron has got the dendrites, little branches, leading to a long dendron when we are looking at our sensory neuron. Now, that's because the dendrites in the dendron actually transmit the electrical impulses towards the cell body. When we look at the axon is what transmits the electrical impulse away from the cell body. So when we're looking at the sensory neuron, we tend to find that our cell body is located in the middle. There is a long dendron and then a short axon, which leads to either a relay neuron, a motor neuron, or directly to the brain, depending on where that sensory neuron is coming from. But the key thing for us to note is this sensory neuron is going to conduct this impulse from a receptor to the central nervous system. Now we can quite clearly see that this neuron has got myelin sheath because it's got to cover a long distance, potentially if we're talking about from our fingertips or from our toes. It needs to send the impulse over a long distance, therefore it is myelinated. And I have done a whole video on the myelinated neuron, so do check that one out as well. But with regards to the myelin sheath, we know that if it is a myelinated neuron, we also need to identify these nodes of Ranvier. So the nodes of Ranvier are those gaps between the myelin sheath. So we have our sensory neuron then, and our sensory neuron is obviously going to pass that information from the stimulus, the sensory receptor, all the way to our central nervous system. So now what we need to look at is, well, how are the impulses transmitted between the sensory neuron to any other neuron? So to pass the impulse onto another neuron, that's where we bring in our relay neurons. Now that tends to be within our central nervous system, our brain, our spinal cord. So these relay neurons have got dendrites, they have got axons, they've got a cell body, but what we tend to find are these are much shorter. So we have short axons, short dendrites, if we're identifying a relay neuron. And then we move on to our motor neuron. So our motor neuron is going to conduct the nerve impulse from the central nervous system to an effector. Now that effector could be a gland or it could be a muscle, but what we know is they have one very long axon, and because of that we tend to find the cell body is identifiable at the end with short dendrites. So if they're going to ask you to identify whether you're looking at a sensory, a relay, or a motor neuron, it's important you look at the length of the dendrites and the length of the axons. And what we know is at our motor neuron, those muscles, those glands are going to carry out whatever that response is. And I will look at that in more detail with the animal response videos. So I hope you have liked this video, and if you have, then please do click on the like button and subscribe to my channel. And if you haven't already done so, please do check out my revision platform, www.aiqchat.com.